They say pain has a way of revealing who people really are. I never believed that until the day I woke up from knee surgery and discovered I was completely alone. My name is Margaret. I'm 55 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew what my life was. I thought I understood my place in this family I'd helped build, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. I was wrong. The surgery wasn't optional. Years of working on my feet, first as a nurse, then caring for my aging mother until she passed, then raising my son while my husband worked long hours, had destroyed my right knee. The doctor said it was bone on bone, that I'd been walking on what amounted to ground glass for at least 2 years. "How did you stand it?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. I didn't have an answer for him. You just do, don't you? You keep moving because people need you to keep moving. You swallow the pain because complaining feels selfish when others have their own burdens to carry. The surgery was supposed to fix everything. 6 weeks of recovery, the doctor said. Physical therapy. Rest. You'll need help, he emphasized, looking directly at my son Michael, who'd driven me to the pre-op appointment. She won't be able to put weight on that leg for at least 2 weeks. No stairs, no cooking, no childcare. Michael nodded. His wife, Jennifer, smiled beside him. "We'll take care of everything, Mom," he assured me, squeezing my hand. "You just focus on getting better." I believed him. God help me. I believed every word. The surgery itself was a blur of anesthesia and fluorescent lights. I remember the cold operating room, the mask lowering over my face, the doctor's calm voice telling me to count backward from 10. I made it to 7 before everything went dark. When I woke up, the pain was immediate and all-consuming. They'd warned me it would hurt. But nothing prepares you for the reality of having your bones sawed apart and reconstructed with metal and screws. My leg was wrapped in bandages thick as a winter coat, elevated on pillows, throbbing with each heartbeat like some kind of cruel metronome marking time I couldn't escape. Michael came to pick me up from the hospital. Just Michael. Jennifer had to stay home with the kids, he explained. 5-year-old twins, Lucas and Emma, too young to sit quietly in a hospital waiting room. I understood. Of course I understood. I'm a grandmother. I know how exhausting small children can be. The ride home was excruciating. Every bump in the road sent shockwaves through my surgery site. I bit my lip to keep from crying out, not wanting Michael to feel bad about driving conditions he couldn't control. He kept apologizing anyway, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every time I failed to suppress a sharp intake of breath. "Almost there, Mom," he said, his voice tight with what I interpreted as concern. Now I wonder if it was something else entirely. Guilt, maybe. Or the discomfort of someone who knows they're about to do something unforgivable. He helped me into the house. My house. The 3-bedroom ranch I'd lived in for 30 years. Where I'd raised him. Where every corner held memories of birthday parties and homework sessions and ordinary family dinners that seemed precious only in retrospect. He settled me on the couch with my leg elevated, brought me water and my pain medication, made sure I could reach the remote control and my phone. "Jennifer will check on you tomorrow," he said, already edging toward the door. "She'll bring groceries and see what you need." Then he was gone, and I was alone with the pain and the silence and the naive belief that tomorrow would bring the help I'd been promised. If you like stories about real people facing real struggles, please subscribe to our channel. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and it really helps us continue sharing these stories. And comment below with what city you're watching from. I'd love to know where you are. Tomorrow came with a knock on my door at 8 in the morning. I'd spent a sleepless night on the couch, unable to navigate the stairs to my bedroom, drifting in and out of consciousness between doses of medication that dulled the pain without eliminating it entirely. Every small movement was an exercise in calculated suffering. Shifting position, reaching for water, even just breathing deeply enough to ward off the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm me in the dark hours before dawn. I dragged myself upright, gasping at the way my knee protested even that small movement. Using the walker the hospital had provided, I inched toward the door, each step a marathon of determination and gritted teeth. By the time I reached the door and fumbled it open, sweat was running down my face despite the cool morning air. Jennifer stood on my porch, designer sunglasses perched on her head, yoga pants that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill, a coffee cup from the expensive cafe downtown in one manicured hand. Behind her, the twins bounced and squirmed in anticipation of whatever adventure they thought awaited them. "Good morning." Jennifer's voice was bright, determinedly cheerful in a way that immediately set my nerves on edge. She didn't wait for me to respond before bending down to the children. "Lucas, Emma, give Grandma a hug. Careful of her leg, remember?" The twins rushed forward before I could brace myself, their small bodies colliding with mine in a tangle of excitement and affection that nearly knocked me off balance. I grabbed the doorframe to steady myself, my walker clattering against the wall as pain shot through my surgical site like lightning. "Careful, sweeties," I managed, trying to keep my voice calm even as black spots danced at the edges of my vision. "Grandma's leg is very sore right now." Jennifer stepped inside, carrying 2 enormous duffel bags that she deposited in my entryway with a heavy thud. A grocery bag hung from her other arm, which she carried into the kitchen without asking permission or waiting for invitation. I followed as quickly as I could manage, confusion beginning to crystallize into something closer to dread. The twins had already discovered my remote control and were arguing over what channel to watch, their voices rising in pitch and volume with each exchange. "So, here's the thing," Jennifer began, unloading items onto my counter with efficient movements that suggested she'd rehearsed this conversation. Bread, peanut butter, boxes of macaroni and cheese, chicken nuggets, juice boxes, provisions for children, not for a post-surgical patient who needed proper nutrition to heal. "Michael's company is sending him to that conference in Denver, and I've been so stressed lately with the kids and the house and everything." She paused, taking a long sip of her coffee before continuing, not quite meeting my eyes. "My sister offered me her beach house for the week. It's a once-in-a-year opportunity, and I really, really need this break, Margaret. You understand, right?" The words hung in the air between us, their meaning so outrageous that my brain initially refused to process them. Surely she couldn't be suggesting what it sounded like she was suggesting. "Jennifer," I began carefully, "I just had major surgery 3 days ago. I can't even walk to my own bathroom without help. I'm on heavy pain medication every 4 hours. The doctor explicitly said." "But you're here at home anyway," she interrupted, her tone reasonable, as if she were explaining something obvious to someone slow to understand. "You don't have to work. You're just recovering, which you'd be doing anyway, right? The kids are easy. They can entertain themselves. You just need to make sure they eat and don't kill each other." She laughed at this last part, as if the casual reference to her children's safety was somehow amusing rather than horrifying. "I can't," I said, hearing my voice shake. "Jennifer, I physically cannot take care of 2 5-year-olds right now. I can barely take care of myself. What if something happens? What if they need something and I can't get to them fast enough? What if I fall trying to help them?" Jennifer's expression hardened, her previous cheerfulness evaporating like morning dew under harsh sunlight. "You know what, Margaret? I have given up everything for this family. Everything. My career, my body, my freedom. And I'm asking for 1 week. 1 single week to remember what it feels like to be a human being, instead of just a servant to everyone else's needs." The unfairness of this accusation struck me like a physical blow. I wanted to remind her that I, too, had given up careers and bodies and freedom, that I'd raised my son largely alone while my husband worked 60-hour weeks, that I'd cared for my dying mother in this very house, changing her diapers and managing her medications and holding her hand through the terror of losing herself piece by piece to dementia. But something in Jennifer's eyes told me that pointing out these parallels would accomplish nothing. She'd already decided I was the villain in whatever narrative she'd constructed to justify what she was about to do. She set her coffee cup down on my counter with a decisive click. "You don't work. You literally do nothing all day. You're just sitting here recovering, which means you're home anyway. The kids will keep you company. It'll be good for all of you." The words landed like stones in water, each one creating ripples of disbelief that spread through my chest. "You don't work. You do nothing all day." As if the surgery I'd just endured was some kind of vacation. As if recovery meant lounging in leisure rather than fighting through pain that made every breath feel like a negotiation with my own body. "Jennifer, please listen to me." I tried again, hearing the desperation creep into my voice. "I'm on medication that makes me drowsy. I can't drive. I can't lift anything. I can't even stand for more than a few minutes without my leg swelling. What if there's an emergency? Then call 911, she said flatly, already checking her phone, her attention dividing between me and whatever messages demanded her immediate response. Margaret, I've already booked the flight. My sister is expecting me. Michael knows about this. He thinks it's a great idea for me to get some rest. That last part felt like a betrayal sharper than any physical pain. Michael knows. My son, who'd sat in that pre-op appointment and heard the doctor's explicit instructions, who'd promised to take care of everything, had approved this, had conspired with his wife to abandon me when I was at my most vulnerable. The kids' stuff is in those bags, Jennifer continued, gesturing toward the duffel bags she'd dumped by my door. Clothes, pajamas, their tablets for quiet time. There's food in that grocery bag. I wrote a list of what they like. They're pretty self-sufficient, honestly. Just park them in front of the TV and they'll be fine. She was moving toward the door now, her movements quick and purposeful, like someone fleeing a crime scene before witnesses could gather. The twins were still arguing over the remote, their voices rising to levels that made my head throb in rhythm with my knee. Jennifer, wait. But she was already on the porch, sunglasses back in place, car keys jangling in her hand. I'll be back next Sunday. You'll be fine. You've raised kids before. This will be easy compared to that. Oh, and there's a list on top of the grocery bag. Just some things we need from the store if you have a chance to get out. The absurdity of this statement, suggesting I might casually go shopping when I couldn't even walk to my own mailbox, hung in the air for one frozen moment before she waved cheerfully and headed down my driveway. I stood in my doorway, supporting myself against the frame, watching her SUV pull away from my curb with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd successfully offloaded an inconvenient burden. The morning sun was bright, cheerful, completely at odds with the darkness spreading through my chest. Behind me, something crashed. I turned as quickly as my ruined knee allowed to see Emma standing over the remains of a decorative vase that had belonged to my mother, her face frozen in that moment before a child decides whether to cry or lie about what happened. It was an accident, Lucas announced immediately, throwing his sister under the bus with the casual betrayal that siblings perfected early. Emma knocked it over trying to reach the cookies. There were no cookies on that shelf. There were no cookies anywhere within their reach. I'd learned years ago to keep treats stored away when the twins visited, but explaining this seemed pointless when pieces of my mother's vase lay scattered across my hardwood floor, sharp edges mixing with the silk flowers that had been arranged inside. "It's okay," I heard myself say, the words automatic, soothing, even as my mind raced through the impossibility of cleaning up broken glass when I couldn't kneel, couldn't bend, couldn't do anything but stand here and watch small disasters unfold around me. Just don't touch it. Don't step near it. Go sit on the couch and I'll figure this out. The first day was survival. I couldn't call it anything else. Every task that normally took minutes stretched into exhausting marathons of pain and improvisation. Making lunch meant leaning against the counter, preparing sandwiches one-handed while the other gripped my walker, sweat running down my back from the effort of simply standing upright. The twins were bored within an hour. 5-year-olds need constant stimulation, activity, attention. They need someone who can run with them, play with them, redirect their energy into constructive channels. I could offer none of those things. Instead, I parked them in front of my television, cycling through streaming services, trying to find shows that would hold their attention long enough for me to catch my breath and count down the minutes until my next pain pill. Lucas wanted to go outside. Emma wanted snacks every 20 minutes. Both of them asked repeatedly when Mommy was coming back, their small faces growing more confused and upset as the day wore on, and they began to understand that Grandma couldn't do the things Mommy could do, that something was wrong even if they couldn't articulate exactly what. "Why can't you walk right?" Lucas asked with the brutal honesty of children who haven't learned that some questions hurt. "Why do you have that weird thing?" He pointed at my walker with the kind of fascination usually reserved for carnival oddities. "Grandma hurt her leg," I explained, lowering myself carefully onto the couch next to him, the movement sending fresh waves of pain radiating from my knee. "The doctors fixed it, but it needs time to get better." "When will it be better?" Emma climbed into my lap before I could stop her, her weight pressing directly on my surgical site. I bit back a scream. tears springing to my eyes as I tried to gently shift her position without frightening her. "Soon, sweetheart," I managed, my voice tight. "But right now, Grandma needs you to be very careful around her leg, okay? Can you sit right here next to me instead?" By evening, I was running on fumes and desperation. The pain medication made me foggy, disconnected from reality in ways that terrified me when I was responsible for two small children. But the pain without medication was unbearable, impossible to function through. I was trapped between two equally dangerous options, forced to choose between mental clarity with agony or dulled suffering with impaired judgment. Dinner was chicken nuggets heated in the oven. I'd stood at the stove long enough to prepare them, gripping the counter until my knuckles went white, focusing on breathing through the pain that screamed through my leg with each minute I remained upright. The twins ate without complaint, their simple taste satisfied by processed food Jennifer had provided. Bedtime should have been 8 o'clock. By 9:30, both children were still awake, wired from too much screen time and not enough physical activity. I'd tried reading to them, but my voice kept fading as exhaustion and pain medication pulled me toward unconsciousness. I'd tried settling them in the guest room, but they wanted water. Then they needed the bathroom. Then they weren't tired. Then they were scared of the dark. Then Lucas had to tell me something very important about a video game he'd played last week. By 10 o'clock, I gave up. I let them fall asleep on the couch while I dozed fitfully in my recliner, my leg elevated, my body screaming in protest at another night of inadequate rest. The second day was worse. My knee had swollen during the night, angry and inflamed from too much standing, too much movement, too much stress on tissue that was supposed to be healing. The pain was no longer just localized to the surgical site. It radiated down my calf and up into my hip, turning my entire right side into a landscape of suffering. I'd missed my morning physical therapy exercises. I'd been supposed to start them the day after surgery, gentle movements designed to prevent scar tissue and maintain range of motion. But there was no time, no space, no possibility of lying on the floor doing leg lifts when two children needed breakfast and entertainment and constant supervision. The grocery list Jennifer had left sat on my counter, mocking me with its casual assumptions. Milk, eggs, bread, fresh fruit, yogurt. All things that required a trip to the store. An impossible task when I couldn't drive and could barely walk from room to room in my own house. I called Michael that afternoon during what the twins called quiet time, a period when they watched tablets in separate rooms, giving me 30 precious minutes of relative peace. His phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I tried again an hour later. Same result. Finally, that evening, he called back. "Hey, Mom. Sorry I missed your calls. Conference has been crazy." His voice sounded distant, distracted, like I was just another item on a checklist of obligations to address before moving on to more important matters. "Michael, I need help." I tried to keep my voice steady, but it cracked anyway, betraying the desperation I'd been trying to hide. "I can't do this. The twins are too much. I can barely take care of myself right now, let alone 2 active 5-year-olds. You have to come get them, or send someone. Mom, Jennifer really needed this break." He cut me off with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd anticipated this conversation and prepared his responses. "She's been struggling. The kids are a lot for her, and she never gets time to herself. 1 week. That's all we're asking. You managed to raise me by yourself most of the time. This should be easy compared to that." The comparison stung more than he could have possibly understood. Yes, I'd raised him largely alone, but I'd done it with 2 functioning knees, without surgical pain that made every movement an act of willpower, without heavy medications that turned my thoughts muddy and slow. I'd done it as a younger woman with energy reserves I no longer possessed, before decades of physical labor had worn my body down to something fragile and unreliable. "Michael, your father was there in the evenings. I could drive. I could cook real meals. I could chase after you when you ran into the street." My voice was rising now, control slipping away as panic tightened its grip. "I had major surgery 3 days ago. The doctor said I needed help. You were there. You heard him. I know, and Jennifer's helping by taking the kids so you can rest." "She didn't take the kids. She left them here, with me, when I can't even walk to the bathroom without a walker." Silence on the other end. Long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped, if this connection between us had finally severed completely. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge of irritation that made my chest tighten. "Look, Mom, I don't know what you want me to do. I'm in Denver. Jennifer's at the beach and deserves that time. The kids are fed. They're safe. They're with their grandmother who loves them. Yes, it's not ideal timing, but sometimes we all have to make sacrifices for family. You taught me that, remember?" The words were designed to shame me, to reframe my legitimate need for help as selfish refusal to make the kinds of sacrifices good mothers and grandmothers were supposed to make without complaint. And underneath it all, I heard what he wasn't saying. "You're not important enough to inconvenience us. Your pain doesn't matter as much as Jennifer's need for vacation or my career advancement. I'm asking you to come home," I said quietly, tears running down my face now, hot and shameful. "I'm asking you to be my son and help your mother when she's hurt and scared and can't do this alone. 1 week, Mom. Then everything goes back to normal. You'll see. It won't be as bad as you think." He hung up before I could respond. I sat there holding my phone, staring at the screen where his name still glowed, trying to understand when exactly I'd become so disposable to the child I'd carried in my body, fed from my breast, raised with every ounce of love and dedication I possessed. The third day, I ran out of clean clothes for the twins. Their duffel bags had seemed so full when Jennifer dropped them off, but 5-year-olds go through outfits with remarkable speed. Spilled juice, playground dirt, mysterious stains that appeared between breakfast and lunch. By Wednesday morning, I was facing the reality that I needed to do laundry. My washing machine was in the basement, down 13 stairs that might as well have been Mount Everest given my current physical condition. The doctor had been explicit, no stairs for at least 2 weeks, but the twins couldn't wear dirty clothes, and I had no way to get clean ones. I stood at the top of those basement stairs for a long time, looking down into the darkness below, my hand gripping the railing so tight my fingers went numb. The logical part of my brain screamed that this was dangerous, that I could fall and re-injure my knee or worse, break something else and end up in even more desperate circumstances. But the children needed clean clothes, and there was no one coming to help. I went down backward, one step at a time, sitting and scooting like a child, my walker left behind at the top because it was useless on stairs. Each downward movement sent lightning bolts of pain through my surgical site. By the time I reached the bottom, I was sobbing, my pajama pants soaked with sweat, my entire body shaking from exertion and agony. Getting back up took twice as long. I had to pull myself up using the railing and my one good leg, dragging my surgical leg behind me, pausing every 2 steps to breathe through pain that made my vision blur. The twins found me halfway up, frozen on a middle step, tears streaming down my face, physically unable to continue but equally unable to go back down. "Grandma, why are you crying?" Emma's voice was small, frightened. She'd never seen an adult completely undone by physical limitation, had no framework for understanding what she was witnessing. "I'm okay, sweetheart," I lied, forcing myself to move one more agonizing step. "Grandma just needs a minute to rest." Lucas ran to get me water. Emma sat on the top step and sang me a song she'd learned at preschool, something about flowers and sunshine. Their small kindnesses broke something in me that was already fractured, made me realize that these children, innocent victims of their parents' selfishness, were trying to take care of me because they understood, in their limited way, that something was very wrong with this situation. The 4th day, Mrs. Chen from next door knocked on my front door. I'd heard her name mentioned before, my neighbor of 15 years who I'd waved to occasionally, but never really known. She was a tiny woman in her 70s, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her dark eyes sharp with the kind of intelligence that came from decades of observing people and understanding what they tried to hide. "I've been watching," she said without preamble when I opened the door, leaning heavily on my walker, looking like death warmed over in unwashed pajamas I'd been wearing for 2 days. "You had surgery. I saw your son help you inside last week. Now suddenly you're chasing children around, dragging trash to the curb, struggling to get your mail." I opened my mouth to make excuses, to explain that everything was fine, that I was managing, that I didn't need anything, but Mrs. Chen held up a small hand, stopping me before I could begin the lies. Don't, she said firmly. I had knee replacement surgery last year. I know what you're going through, and I know that what's happening here isn't right. Where are the parents? Something about her directness, her refusal to pretend everything was normal, cracked the dam I'd been building to hold back my emotions. The truth poured out. Jennifer's departure, Michael's absence, the impossible situation I'd been left in with no warning and no support. Mrs. Chen's face darkened as I spoke, her expression shifting from concern to anger on my behalf. That's elder abuse, she said bluntly. What they're doing to you is a form of neglect and exploitation. You're recovering from surgery. You can't care for young children. They know this and they left you anyway. The words elder abuse hit me like cold water. I'd never thought of myself in those terms. Elder implied someone old and fragile, someone past their prime and vulnerable to mistreatment. But standing there in my doorway, unable to walk without assistance, abandoned by my family when I needed them most, I couldn't deny the accuracy of her assessment. I can help some, Mrs. Chen continued, her tone softening. I'll bring meals. I can watch the children for a few hours so you can rest properly. But Margaret, you need to document this. You need to tell someone official what's happening here. They're my family, I said weakly, the objection automatic even though I knew she was right. Michael is my son. I can't. Your son put you in danger, Mrs. Chen interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. Whether he meant to or not, whether he understands it or not, what he's done is wrong, and you protecting him from consequences doesn't help him become a better person. It just teaches him that he can treat you this way without repercussions. She left before I could argue further, promising to return with dinner and some groceries I desperately needed. I closed the door and leaned against it, her words echoing in my head. Elder abuse, neglect, exploitation, terms I'd associated with strangers in nursing homes, not with families, not with sons who'd once told me I was their hero. The fifth day, I stopped trying to keep up appearances. What was the point? No one was coming to check on me. No one cared whether I showered or changed my clothes, or maintained the illusion of having everything under control. I existed in a fog of pain medication and exhaustion, moving through my house like a ghost haunting the ruins of a life I'd once believed was secure. The twins had stopped asking when their mother was coming home. They'd settled into an uneasy acceptance of this temporary reality, their resilience both heartbreaking and admirable. Children adapt because they have no choice, because their survival depends on accepting whatever circumstances adults impose on them. Lucas had started having nightmares. He'd wake up crying around 2 a.m, calling for his mother, and I'd have to drag myself from my recliner to comfort him, my body screaming in protest at movement that should have been simple, but felt like climbing a mountain in the darkness. I'd sit on the edge of his bed, stroking his hair, whispering reassurances I didn't believe while my knee throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat. Emma had become clingy in ways that weren't typical for her. She followed me everywhere, even to the bathroom, terrified that I might disappear the way her mother had. "Don't leave, Grandma," she'd whisper, her small hand gripping mine with surprising strength. "Promise, you won't leave like Mommy." The promises stuck in my throat. How could I assure her of anything when I'd learned so brutally that the people we trusted most were capable of abandoning us without warning? But I made the promises anyway, because what else could I do? These children needed stability, even if it was built on foundations of lies. Mrs. Chen kept her word. She appeared every evening with containers of food, homemade soup, rice dishes, vegetables cooked until they were soft enough for someone with no appetite to force down. She never stayed long, sensing perhaps that my pride was already damaged enough without extended witnesses to my humiliation. But her kindness was a lifeline, proof that somewhere in this world, people still believed in helping others without demanding payment or gratitude or endless sacrifice in return. "Have you heard from your son?" she asked on the 5th evening, setting a container of chicken and dumplings on my counter, the smell alone almost enough to make me cry with gratitude. I shook my head, not trusting my voice. Michael hadn't called since that first conversation when I'd begged him to come home. Jennifer's social media, which I'd stupidly checked in a moment of masochistic curiosity, showed pictures of her on the beach, cocktails in hand, carefree smile aimed at the camera. "Finally getting the self-care I deserve," read one caption. The comments below were filled with supportive messages from friends. "You go, girl! Moms need breaks too. Good for you for prioritizing yourself." No one asked where her children were. No one questioned who was caring for them while she prioritized herself. No one seemed to think it was relevant that her self-care came at the cost of someone else's suffering. "You look exhausted, Mrs. Chen observed, studying my face with the clinical assessment of someone who'd seen too many people push themselves past breaking points. "When did you last sleep properly?" "I don't remember," I admitted. And it was true. The days and nights had blurred together into one continuous cycle of pain and obligation, punctuated by moments of medication-induced fog that couldn't really be called rest. She left with promises to return the next day, and I was alone again with 2 children and a body that felt like it was betraying me with every breath. I looked around my house, at the toys scattered across the floor that I couldn't bend to pick up, at the dishes piling in the sink because standing at the counter to wash them required more strength than I possessed, at the dust gathering on surfaces I used to keep immaculate because cleanliness was one of the few things I could control in a life that often felt chaotic. This house used to be my pride. I'd maintained it carefully over the years, even after my husband passed away 8 years ago. Every corner represented work I'd done, improvements I'd saved for, decisions I'd made to create a home that felt safe and welcoming. Now it looked like a disaster zone, evidence of my failure to manage even the most basic domestic responsibilities. I sank into my recliner, the only place I could sleep anymore, since my bed was upstairs in a bedroom I couldn't reach without risking serious injury. The twins were finally asleep in the guest room after another extended bedtime battle. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling walls. In the darkness, I let myself think the thoughts I'd been pushing away for days. What if I couldn't recover from this? What if the stress and inadequate rest and constant movement on a knee that needed stillness caused permanent damage? What if I ended up with chronic pain, limited mobility, dependent on others for basic care for the rest of my life? What if my son never came back? What if this was my future now? A woman discarded by her family, useful only as free childcare, valuable only for what she could provide, rather than who she was. The thoughts spiraled darker. I'd sacrificed everything to raise Michael. My education, my career aspirations, my youth. I'd stayed in a marriage that wasn't particularly happy, because I believed children needed stability. I'd worked low-paying jobs that fit around his school schedule, instead of pursuing opportunities that might have led somewhere better. I'd told myself it was all worth it, because I was building something important, raising a good person who would understand the value of family and commitment, and caring for people who couldn't always care for themselves. Where had that good person gone? When had my son learned to prioritize convenience over compassion? How had I failed so completely to teach him that people weren't disposable? That obligations to family meant showing up when things were difficult rather than only when it was easy and comfortable? The 6th day brought a new crisis. Emma woke up with a fever. Not dangerously high, but enough to make her miserable, clingy, demanding comfort I was barely equipped to provide. She wanted to be held, but sitting with a 5-year-old in my lap put pressure on my surgical site that made me gasp with pain. She wanted cold drinks and special foods and constant attention. All things that required movement and energy I didn't have to give. Lucas, sensing his sister's advantage, decided he also needed special treatment. He complained of a stomachache that seemed suspiciously convenient, whined about every meal I prepared, followed me around the house demanding entertainment and attention with the relentless persistence only small children could sustain. By noon, I was crying openly, too exhausted to hide my breakdown from the children who'd already seen too much of my weakness. I sat on the couch with Emma burning up against my side and Lucas asking for the 100th time when we could go to the park. And I simply couldn't pretend anymore that I was managing or coping or doing anything except barely surviving. "Grandma's very tired," I told them, hearing my voice shake, watching their small faces crumple with confusion and fear. "I need you both to play quietly for a little while. Can you do that for me?" They tried. God love them, they really tried. But 5-year-olds aren't built for quiet, independent play, especially when one is sick and the other is bored. and both are confused about why their normally capable grandmother has transformed into this weeping, helpless version of herself. That afternoon, Mrs. Chen found me sitting on my front porch steps, unable to get back up, my walker out of reach inside the house where I'd left it after a trip to check the mail. The twins were inside watching television at volumes that suggested they'd figured out how to override the parental controls. She didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside me on the concrete steps, her small frame settling with a soft sigh. We sat together in silence while I cried, while the weight of everything that had happened finally crushed whatever dignity I'd been trying to preserve. "I can't do this," I whispered. "I thought I could, but I can't. And no one is coming to help me. No one cares that I'm drowning here." "I care," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "And I think you'll find that other people care too, once they know what's really happening. People are better than you think, Margaret. Your family might have failed you, but that doesn't mean everyone will." She helped me back inside, retrieving my walker, steadying me as I stood on shaking legs. She took Emma's temperature, gave her children's ibuprofen from my medicine cabinet, settled both kids with juice and crackers while I collapsed in my chair. "Tomorrow is day 7, she said before leaving. "Tomorrow they come back. You just have to survive one more night. Can you do that?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed her. One more night felt like an eternity when every hour dragged by with the weight of suffering that had no clear endpoint. But Mrs. Chen's confidence gave me something to hold on to, a small light in the darkness that had consumed my week. That night, after the twins finally fell asleep and the house settled into the kind of quiet that felt both peaceful and oppressive, I sat in my recliner and let myself remember who I used to be. Not the broken woman who'd spent 7 days barely surviving, but the person I'd been before surgery, before abandonment, before I learned how disposable I'd become to the people I loved most. I'd been a nurse once before Michael was born. I'd worked in pediatric care, tending to sick children, comforting frightened parents, making a difference in people's lives during their most vulnerable moments. I'd been good at it, competent, compassionate, reliable. People had depended on me and I hadn't let them down. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that version of myself. I'd let the years of marriage and motherhood and widowhood reshape me into someone smaller, someone whose entire identity revolved around serving others and asking nothing in return. I'd accepted the role of convenient helper, available grandmother, woman with nothing better to do than accommodate everyone else's needs. But that nurse, the one who'd stood up to difficult doctors when patient care was at stake, who'd advocated for families who didn't know how to advocate for themselves, who'd worked double shifts because people needed her and she was strong enough to answer that call, she was still in here somewhere, buried under years of diminishing herself to make others comfortable, but not gone. Not entirely. I thought about Mrs. Chen's words. Elder abuse, neglect, exploitation. The terms had felt shocking when she first spoke them. Accusations too harsh for what was surely just a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, an unfortunate situation that no one had intended. But sitting there in the darkness, my knee throbbing despite medication, my body exhausted beyond anything I'd experienced even during the marathon of raising a child alone, I couldn't deny the accuracy of her assessment. My son had knowingly left me in a dangerous situation. His wife had prioritized her vacation over my well-being and her children's safety. They'd both made calculated decisions that put me at risk, and they'd done so without apparent guilt or concern for consequences. That wasn't love. That wasn't family. That was exploitation, pure and simple. Using someone because they're available and unlikely to refuse, because they've been trained through years of relationship to prioritize others' needs above their own survival. Something shifted in me then. Not anger. Not yet. That would come later. This was something quieter, but more powerful. A decision forming in the space between heartbeats, crystallizing with each throb of pain from my damaged knee. I would survive this night and the morning that followed. I would get through Jennifer's return and whatever excuses or non-apologies she offered. And then I would make choices. Real choices. Not the passive acceptance of whatever circumstances others imposed on me. It wasn't revenge I was planning. It was something more fundamental. Reclaiming my right to be treated with basic human dignity. Establishing boundaries that should have existed all along. refusing to participate in my own diminishment. The seventh morning arrived with the kind of golden sunshine that seemed to mock the darkness of my circumstances. I woke early, if you could call my restless semi-consciousness sleep, and found myself studying the chaos of my living room with new eyes. The scattered toys, the stained carpet, the stack of dishes I hadn't had the strength to wash, evidence of a week that should never have happened. I needed to document this. Mrs. Chen had been right about that. Not for revenge, not to hurt Michael or Jennifer, but to protect myself, to create a record of what had occurred, a paper trail that established facts beyond dispute or convenient reinterpretation. Using my phone, I took photographs. The messy house, yes, but more importantly, the medical paperwork from my surgery showing the explicit post-operative instructions I'd been given, the prescription bottles with dates that proved I'd been on heavy pain medication during the entire week the twins were here, the grocery list Jennifer had left, expecting me to shop when I couldn't drive, the calendar showing the dates of her departure and planned return. I photographed my knee, swollen, discolored, clearly inflamed beyond what should have been normal 1 week post-surgery. I photographed the basement stairs I'd been forced to navigate. I photographed Emma's fever medication with the date stamp showing when I'd had to care for a sick child while recovering from major surgery. Each photo felt like reclaiming a piece of power that had been taken from me. This was my story, my truth, preserved in digital format where it couldn't be dismissed or rewritten to suit someone else's narrative. Whatever happened next, I would have evidence. I would have proof. The twins woke around 8, groggy and irritable from a week of disrupted routines and insufficient attention. I made them breakfast, cereal and toast, nothing elaborate, the best I could manage given my limitations. They ate without complaint, their small faces showing the kind of weariness that children shouldn't have to carry. "Is Mommy coming today?" Lucas asked, milk dribbling down his chin, his eyes hopeful in ways that broke my heart. "Yes, sweetheart. Today, Mommy comes home." "Are you still going to be sick?" Emma climbed into the chair beside me, her fever gone but her energy depleted from fighting off whatever virus had struck her down. "Grandma's knee is going to need more time to heal," I told her honestly. "But Grandma is going to be okay, and you're both going to go home with Mommy and Daddy, and everything will be better." I wasn't sure if I was reassuring them or myself. Maybe both, maybe neither. The words felt hollow, spoken by someone who no longer believed in the fairy tale endings she'd once thought were guaranteed rewards for good behavior and patient suffering. Jennifer arrived at 2 in the afternoon, pulling into my driveway in her SUV with its perfectly maintained exterior and expensive rims that Michael had bought her for their anniversary last year. She looked refreshed, tanned, relaxed in ways that made my exhausted fury burn hotter. Her hair had been freshly styled. Her nails were manicured. She glowed with the kind of health and vitality that came from a week of sleeping late and eating well, and thinking only of your own comfort. She knocked once, then let herself in without waiting for me to answer, calling out cheerfully as if she were arriving at a party, rather than returning to collect the children she'd abandoned. "Hello, we're back. Kids, Mommy's here." The twins rushed to her with shrieks of joy, throwing themselves at her legs, competing for her attention with the desperate enthusiasm of children who'd been starved for maternal presence. She hugged them, cooed over them, asked about their week in the bright, interested tone of someone who genuinely believed she'd done nothing wrong. I watched from my recliner, unable to stand quickly enough to greet her properly, my body too damaged and exhausted to perform the social rituals expected in such moments. She finally looked at me, really looked, and something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or concern, or possibly just mild discomfort at seeing how thoroughly the week had destroyed me. "Margaret, you look tired," she said. The observation so absurd it almost made me laugh. Tired. As if I'd merely had a rough week at work rather than surviving 7 days of abandonment and neglect while recovering from major surgery. "The kids were great," I said, my voice flat, emotionless. I'd used up all my feelings during the dark nights of pain and fear. What remained was something harder, colder, more practical. But I wasn't able to care for them properly. I should never have been put in that position. Jennifer's smile faltered slightly, her expression shifting to something defensive. "I appreciate you watching them. I know it wasn't ideal timing. But sometimes we all have to make sacrifices for family, right? And I really needed that break. I was on the verge of a breakdown. The casual dismissal of my suffering, the reframing of her selfish choice as somehow equivalent to my forced sacrifice, the suggestion that her mental health crisis justified putting me in physical danger. All of it crystallized into perfect clarity. This woman had no concept of what she'd done, no understanding that actions had consequences, that using people destroyed relationships, that you couldn't simply take what you wanted and expect gratitude in return. "You left me," I said quietly, meeting her eyes with steady directness. 3 days after major surgery, you dropped off 2 young children and a grocery list, and you left me when I could barely walk. Jennifer's face shifted through several expressions: confusion, defensiveness, and finally, irritation. "I knew you'd be like this. I knew you'd make me feel guilty for taking 1 week for myself. You know what? I'm not going to apologize for prioritizing my mental health. Moms are allowed to have needs too." The audacity of turning herself into the victim, of reframing my legitimate grievance as unreasonable guilt-tripping, would have shocked me a week ago. Now it simply confirmed what I already knew. This woman had no capacity for genuine reflection or accountability. In her mind, she'd done nothing wrong. Her needs would always matter more than anyone else's suffering. "You're right," I said, keeping my voice calm, measured. "Mothers do have needs, and so do people recovering from surgery. The difference is, I didn't have a choice about whether my needs got met. You made that choice for me." She opened her mouth to respond, but I continued, each word careful and deliberate. "I want you to take the children and leave now. I'm very tired, and I need to rest. We can talk about this later, when Michael is home." Something in my tone must have warned her against pushing further. She gathered the twins' belongings with sharp, angry movements, her jaw tight with the offense of someone who'd expected gratitude and received confrontation instead. The children sensed the tension, their earlier joy at seeing their mother dimming as they picked up on the emotional undercurrents they were too young to fully understand. "Say goodbye to Grandma," Jennifer instructed, her voice artificially bright, performing the role of good mother even as resentment radiated from her entire posture. Lucas and Emma hugged me carefully, aware now of my fragility in ways they hadn't been when Jennifer first dropped them off. "Bye, Grandma," Emma whispered. "Feel better." "I will, sweetheart. I love you both." And I did. That was the cruel truth of this situation. I loved these children deeply, would have done anything for them under different circumstances. But their parents had weaponized that love, used it as leverage to exploit me when I was at my most vulnerable. Loving my grandchildren didn't mean I had to accept being treated as disposable. The door closed behind them, and the house fell into a silence that felt different from the oppressive quiet of the past week. This was peaceful, final. The ordeal was over. I had survived. But survival wasn't enough anymore. Something had changed during those 7 days of suffering and abandonment. The old Margaret, the one who absorbed mistreatment and made excuses for people who hurt her, who prioritized keeping peace over demanding respect, had been burned away by pain and betrayal. What remained was someone harder, clearer, unwilling to go back to patterns that had led her to this moment. Over the next 3 days, I rested properly for the first time since surgery. Mrs. Chen continued checking on me, bringing meals, helping with tasks I still couldn't manage alone. Her kindness was offered without strings or expectations, proof that generosity didn't have to come with manipulation or exploitation attached. "Have you talked to your son?" she asked on the 3rd day, sitting at my kitchen table with tea I'd finally had the strength to prepare. "Not yet. He's still in Denver. He comes home tomorrow." "And what will you say to him?" I'd been thinking about that question constantly. What do you say to a child you raised, a man you sacrificed everything for, who demonstrated such casual cruelty when you needed him most? How do you explain that something fundamental had broken between you, that trust once destroyed couldn't simply be wished back into existence? "I'm going to tell him the truth," I said finally. "All of it. What this week was actually like. What they asked me to do and what it cost me. And then I'm going to establish boundaries that should have existed all along." Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. "Good. You're stronger than you think, Margaret. This week proved that. You survived something that would have broken many people. Now you need to make sure it never happens again. That night, I sat at my computer, an old desktop Michael had given me years ago when he upgraded to something newer, and I wrote everything down. Every detail of the week I'd endured, the phone calls that went unanswered, the moments of physical agony when I'd been forced to do things explicitly forbidden by my surgeon, the nights of inadequate sleep, the fear, the loneliness, the growing realization that I'd been abandoned by the people I trusted most. I wrote about Emma's fever and Lucas's nightmares, about dragging myself down the basement stairs to wash their clothes, about crying on my front porch, too weak to stand, while my grandchildren watched television inside and wondered why Grandma wasn't like she used to be. I wrote it all down in clear, factual language without embellishment or drama, just the truth, documented and dated, saved in multiple locations. This was my insurance policy, my protection against future exploitation or convenient revisionism about what had actually occurred. When I finished, it was after midnight. My knee ached. It always ached now, a constant reminder that some damage couldn't be fully repaired, but my mind felt clearer than it had in years. I'd spent so much of my life accommodating others, adjusting myself to fit into spaces that weren't designed for me, accepting less than I deserved because demanding more felt selfish or ungrateful. No more. Michael came home the next afternoon. He called first, his voice carrying the forced cheerfulness of someone who hoped enough time had passed for uncomfortable situations to be forgotten. "Hey, Mom. I'm back from Denver. Conference went great. I thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing." "Please do," I said simply. "We need to talk." Something in my tone must have registered because his cheerfulness dimmed slightly. "Is everything okay?" "No, Michael. Everything is not okay, but we'll discuss it when you get here." He arrived within the hour, still wearing his business clothes, looking successful and put together in ways that highlighted the contrast between his life and mine. He'd been at a conference, staying in nice hotels, eating restaurant meals, networking with colleagues who respected his expertise. I'd been here, surviving an ordeal that should never have happened. "Hey, Mom." He kissed my cheek, his eyes taking in my appearance with what might have been concern or might have been mere acknowledgement that I looked worse than before he'd left. "You look tired. Kids wear you out?" The casual question, asked as if he were inquiring about a normal babysitting arrangement rather than the nightmare I'd endured, confirmed that Jennifer hadn't told him the truth. She'd returned home and said nothing. Probably complained about my attitude, painted herself as the victim of an ungrateful mother-in-law who couldn't even watch her grandchildren for 1 week without making it a dramatic production. "Sit down, Michael." I gestured to the couch, positioning myself in my recliner where I could elevate my leg and maintain the distance I needed for this conversation. "We need to talk about what happened while you and Jennifer were gone." "If this is about Jennifer needing a break," he began, already defensive, already preparing to dismiss whatever I might say. "This is about you leaving your mother 3 days after major surgery to care for 2 young children when she couldn't walk, couldn't drive, and was on heavy pain medication." My voice was calm, steady, each word carefully chosen. "This is about what you asked me to do and what it did to me." I watched his face as the words registered. Confusion first, then dismissal, then the gradual dawning of something that might have been awareness, or might have been just calculated concern about how this situation might reflect on him. "Mom, I know it wasn't ideal timing." "Not ideal?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended, years of suppressed anger finally finding voice. "Michael, your wife dropped off your children and a grocery list 3 days after I had my knee reconstructed. She left while I could barely stand, while I was taking medication that came with warnings about operating machinery or caring for dependents. She left me in a dangerous situation, and you approved it. Jennifer needed? I don't care what Jennifer needed." The interruption felt powerful, necessary. For once in my life, I was going to finish my thoughts without being talked over or dismissed. What about what I needed? What about the explicit instructions from my surgeon that I required help and shouldn't be left alone? What about the fact that I called you, begging you to come home, and you refused? He shifted uncomfortably, trapped between his wife's version of events and the reality he was finally being forced to confront. "You said you were managing. You didn't make it sound urgent." "I shouldn't have had to make it sound urgent." You should have known it was urgent because you were at my pre-op appointment. You heard the doctor explain my limitations. You promised to help me. I paused, letting that sit between us. And then you abandoned me when I needed you most. The silence stretched out, heavy with implications neither of us wanted to fully examine. This wasn't just about 1 week of inadequate care. This was about patterns of behavior, about expectations and obligations, about what family meant and whether that meaning extended beyond convenient arrangements that benefited everyone except the person being exploited. Mom, I'm sorry if you felt— No. I cut him off again, my voice firm. Don't tell me how I felt. Don't minimize what happened by suggesting this is about my perception rather than your actions. I'm going to tell you exactly what this week was like, and you're going to listen. Really listen. For once in your adult life, you're going to hear your mother. I told him everything. About dragging myself down the basement stairs, sitting and scooting like a child because I had no other way to wash his children's clothes. About Emma's fever in the middle of the night, when I could barely stand, but had to comfort a sick child anyway. About Lucas's nightmares and my inability to provide the care he needed. About eating nothing but cereal for 3 days because cooking required standing I couldn't sustain. I told him about the pain that never stopped, about how the constant movement and stress had caused my knee to swell so badly I'd had to call my surgeon's emergency line at 2 a.m, terrified I'd permanently damaged the repair work. About crying on my front porch because I physically couldn't get back into my house without help. Mrs. Chen found me there, I said, watching his face for any sign that he understood the magnitude of what he'd done. Your neighbor found your mother collapsed on her own front steps, unable to stand, while your children were inside unsupervised because I'd been trying to get the mail. His face had gone pale, his earlier defensiveness crumbling as the reality of my words sank in. Mom, I didn't know it was that bad. Jennifer said you were managing fine. She said the kids were easy and you were enjoying the company. Jennifer lied. Or Jennifer saw what she wanted to see because the truth would have required her to cut short her vacation. I paused, letting that sink in. But you, Michael, you knew. You were at that pre-op appointment. You heard the doctor say I'd need help for at least 2 weeks. You promised me you'd make sure I was taken care of, and then you left me anyway. I thought Jennifer would be here checking on you. You thought wrong. And when I called you crying, begging you to come home because I couldn't handle this, you refused. You chose Jennifer's vacation and your career conference over your mother's safety. The words felt heavy, final. That's not a misunderstanding, Michael. That's a choice you made. He stood up, pacing to my window, his back to me, his shoulders tense with whatever emotions he was trying to process or suppress. When he finally turned around, I saw something in his face I'd rarely witnessed. Genuine shame. What do you want me to say? That I screwed up? That I should have come home when you called? Fine, I screwed up. I'm sorry, but I can't go back and change it now. You're right, you can't. I shifted in my chair, wincing as my knee protested even that small movement. But you can understand that something fundamental has changed between us. You can acknowledge that what you did wasn't just poor judgment or bad timing. It was neglect. It was putting me in danger because dealing with the consequences felt inconvenient. That's not fair. Fair. The word came out louder than I'd intended. Years of accumulated hurt finally breaking through my carefully maintained composure. You want to talk about fair? I raised you alone while your father worked 60-hour weeks. I sacrificed my career, my education, my youth to make sure you had everything you needed. I never asked you for anything in return because that's what mothers do. We give without expecting repayment. I leaned forward, ignoring the pain the movement caused, needing him to see my face, to witness the cost of his choices. But when I finally needed something, not money, not favors, just basic care after surgery, you couldn't be bothered. You left me in a situation so dangerous that my surgeon called yesterday to schedule an emergency follow-up because the damage to my knee is worse than it should be at this stage of recovery. That information hit him visibly. His face paled further, his eyes widening with what I hoped was genuine concern rather than just worry about potential liability. The doctor asked me what I'd been doing, I continued, my voice steady now, each word landing with deliberate precision. He asked why there was so much swelling, why I'd lost range of motion, why the incision site showed signs of stress. I told him the truth. I told him I'd been caring for 2 young children because my family left me no choice. What did he say? He documented it in my medical records. He asked if I wanted to file a report with Adult Protective Services. I let that sink in, watched Michael's face as he processed what those words meant. I told him I'd think about it. The silence that followed was absolute. Somewhere outside, a car drove past. Children laughed in a neighbor's yard. Life continued its normal rhythms. But inside my living room, the foundations of our relationship were cracking, restructuring themselves into something new and unknown. You wouldn't. Michael's voice was quiet, uncertain. Mom, that would destroy our family. That could affect my job, Jennifer's reputation. The kids could end up in the system if social services got involved. Stop. I held up my hand, cutting off his spiral into worst-case scenarios. Stop making this about everyone except the person who was actually harmed. I'm not threatening you, Michael. I'm telling you that what happened was serious enough that medical professionals considered it reportable abuse. That's the reality you need to face. He sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands, the successful businessman facade completely stripped away to reveal the frightened child underneath. What do you want from me? I want you to understand what you did. Really understand it. Not just apologize because that's what's expected. I took a breath, steadying myself for what came next. And I want you to know that things are going to be different from now on. I love you. I love Emma and Lucas. But I won't put myself in danger for your convenience again. I won't be available for last-minute babysitting. I won't be the person you call when you need free childcare or emergency backup plans. But you're their grandmother. Exactly. I'm their grandmother, not their parent and not your employee. Grandmothers who are loved and respected get to enjoy their grandchildren in ways that work for everyone. Grandmothers who are exploited eventually have to establish boundaries to protect themselves. I pulled out my phone, opening the folder where I'd saved all the documentation from that terrible week. I have photographs, medical records, a detailed written account of every day you were gone. Mrs. Chen has offered to provide a witness statement. I have everything I need to prove what happened if anyone ever questions my version of events. Michael's eyes went wide. You're documenting this? Like you're building a case against us? I'm protecting myself, I corrected. Because I've learned that I can't trust you to tell the truth about what happened. Jennifer already lied to you about how I was managing. How long before this whole week gets rewritten into a story about an ungrateful mother-in-law who couldn't handle watching her grandchildren for a few days? He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, perhaps realizing that I was right. The truth was already being revised in Jennifer's mind, probably shared with friends over wine as a funny story about her dramatic mother-in-law, rather than an honest account of abandonment and neglect. There's something else. I reached beside my chair, pulling out an envelope I'd prepared earlier. Inside were copies of my medical records, the surgeon's notes about the damage caused by inadequate rest and excessive activity, and my own written account of the week. This is for you to read. Take it home. Share it with Jennifer. Make sure you both understand exactly what you put me through. He took the envelope reluctantly, holding it like it might explode in his hands. And then what? And then you decide what kind of person you want to be. What kind of son? What kind of father? I met his eyes, seeing the man I'd raised reflected back at me alongside the stranger who'd abandoned me when I needed him most. You decide if our relationship continues, and if it does, what that looks like. Because I'm done accepting crumbs of affection and calling it love. I'm done making myself smaller so everyone else can feel more comfortable. The words hung between us, transforming the space into something new and uncertain. This wasn't the mother he knew, the one who always forgave, who always accommodated, who absorbed hurt without complaint because that's what good mothers were supposed to do. This was someone different, someone who'd been forged in the fire of abandonment and emerged with boundaries made of steel. Michael left with the envelope clutched in his hand, his face showing a mixture of shame and confusion that I might have found satisfying under different circumstances. But I felt no triumph in his discomfort, no vindication in forcing him to confront his failures. I felt only exhaustion and a quiet determination to never again allow myself to be diminished by people who claimed to love me. 3 days passed in silence, No phone calls, no text messages, no apologies or explanations. I told myself I didn't care, that I'd meant what I said about establishing boundaries regardless of their response. But late at night, when pain kept me awake and the house felt too empty, I couldn't help wondering if I'd lost my son along with everything else. Mrs. Chen visited daily, bringing food and company, asking nothing in return. "You did the right thing," she assured me over tea on the fourth morning. "Standing up for yourself is never wrong, even when it costs you something. What if it costs me my grandchildren?" The fear I'd been suppressing finally found voice. What if they decide I'm too difficult, too demanding? What if they just cut me out of their lives? Then they never deserved you in the first place, Mrs. Chen said firmly. And those children will grow up eventually. They'll ask questions about why Grandma isn't around anymore. The truth has a way of coming out, Margaret. You protected yourself and documented what happened. That will matter someday, even if it doesn't feel like it matters now. On the fifth day, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Michael standing on my porch, but this time Jennifer was with him. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, her usual confidence replaced by something I couldn't quite identify. Shame, perhaps, or fear of consequences she'd never considered. "We'd like to talk," Michael said quietly. "If you're willing to listen." I stepped back, allowing them entry into my home, into the space where they'd caused so much damage. We sat in my living room, them on the couch, me in my recliner with my leg elevated, the physical distance matching the emotional gulf that had opened between us. Jennifer spoke first, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I read what you wrote. About the week we were gone. About what you went through." She paused, tears gathering in her eyes. "Margaret, I didn't know. I mean, I knew you'd had surgery, but I didn't understand what that meant. I only thought about how much I needed a break." "You knew exactly what it meant," I said quietly, unwilling to let her rewrite history into something more palatable. "The doctor explained it. Michael told you. I told you. You chose not to hear it because hearing it would have interfered with what you wanted." She flinched but didn't argue, which was itself a kind of progress. "You're right. I was selfish. I was so focused on my own stress that I didn't care about yours. And I told Michael you were fine because I didn't want to feel guilty about what I'd done. I wanted to enjoy my vacation without thinking about the cost." The honesty, unexpected and raw, created a small opening in the wall I'd built around my heart. She wasn't making excuses or deflecting blame. She was acknowledging the truth, even though it painted her in the worst possible light. "I'm sorry," Jennifer continued, the words thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry for what I put you through, for leaving you when you were hurt, for prioritizing myself over your safety, for lying to Michael about how you were managing, for all of it." Michael cleared his throat, his own discomfort visible in every tense line of his body. "I read your account too, multiple times, and I talked to your surgeon's office. They confirmed what you told me about the damage to your knee." He paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. "Mom, I failed you. Not just that week, but in ways I'm only starting to understand. I took you for granted. I assumed you'd always be available, always willing to help, regardless of your own circumstances or needs." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his face showing genuine anguish. "You raised me to think about other people, to be considerate and responsible. And somewhere along the way, I stopped applying those lessons to you, like you didn't count. Like mothers don't need the same care and respect as everyone else." The words I'd needed to hear, spoken with sincerity I could feel in the space between us. But words alone couldn't undo the damage, couldn't restore trust that had been shattered by actions that revealed how little I'd mattered when my needs conflicted with their convenience. "I appreciate your apologies," I said carefully. "I believe you mean them, but I need you both to understand that apologies aren't enough. What happened can't be fixed with words. It requires changes, real, permanent changes in how you see me and treat me." "We know," Jennifer said quickly. "We've talked about it, a lot, about what we did wrong and how to make sure it never happens again." She glanced at Michael, who nodded encouragingly. "We want to make things right if you'll let us." Over the next hour, they outlined their plan. They'd enrolled the twins in a regular daycare program, removing the assumption that I was available for free childcare. They'd hired a cleaning service to help with household tasks, acknowledging that Jennifer's stress came from trying to do everything herself rather than from the burdens of motherhood itself. They'd started marriage counseling to address the patterns that had led to such a catastrophic failure of judgment and compassion. "And we want to help you," Michael added, "with your recovery, with whatever you need. I know we can't undo the damage to your knee, but we can support you going forward. Physical therapy appointments, grocery shopping, home repairs, whatever would make your life easier. We also want to pay for private physical therapy sessions," Jennifer said, "beyond what insurance covers. The best therapist we can find, as many sessions as you need. It's not enough, but it's something." I sat with their words, feeling the sincerity behind them while simultaneously understanding that good intentions didn't guarantee changed behavior. People often meant well in the immediate aftermath of consequences, when shame and guilt motivated temporary reformation. The real test would come later, when the crisis had passed, and old patterns beckoned with familiar comfort. "I'll accept your help with physical therapy," I said finally, "and I appreciate the other changes you're making. But I need time. Time to heal physically and emotionally. Time to see if these changes are real or just reactions to being confronted with consequences." "That's fair," Michael said quietly. "More than fair. We'll do whatever you need." "What I need," I said, meeting both their eyes in turn, "is for you to understand that I'm a person, not a resource, that my time and energy have value, that my pain matters just as much as yours, even though I'm older and don't have young children and might seem more available." I paused, making sure they were really listening. "I need you to see me, not just the role I play in your lives." Jennifer was crying openly now, mascara running down her cheeks in dark streaks. "I see you. I'm sorry it took something so terrible for me to really see you, but I do now. And I promise, I swear, I'll never take you for granted again." They left with promises to check in regularly, to give me space while remaining available if I needed anything. After they were gone, I sat in the quiet of my living room and let myself feel the complicated mix of emotions their visit had stirred up. Relief that they'd acknowledged their failures. Cautious hope that perhaps the relationship could be rebuilt on healthier foundations. But also wariness, because I'd learned the hard way that people's words and their actions didn't always align. Mrs. Chen visited that evening, bringing soup and her usual no-nonsense wisdom. "They came by," I told her. "Both of them." They apologized. "And?" She settled into my couch with the comfortable familiarity of someone who'd earned the right to make herself at home in my space. "And I think they meant it, but I'm not sure that's enough." "It isn't," she said bluntly. "Apologies are easy. Change is hard. But you did something important today. You didn't immediately forgive and forget just because they said the right words. You're requiring them to prove their sincerity through sustained, changed behavior. That's wisdom." Over the following weeks, my physical therapy progressed slowly but steadily. The damage from that terrible week had set back my recovery significantly. The surgeon estimated I'd need an additional 2 months of intensive therapy to regain the function I would have had if I'd been able to rest properly in those crucial first weeks after surgery. But with proper care and no additional stress, healing was still possible. Michael and Jennifer kept their promises. They paid for private therapy sessions with a specialist who worked wonders with my damaged knee. They didn't ask for babysitting, didn't drop by unannounced expecting my time and attention. When they did visit, it was with advance notice and genuine concern for my well-being. The twins came by for short supervised visits where their parents actually parented them instead of expecting me to provide entertainment and care. Emma and Lucas seemed happier too, more settled, like the structure and appropriate boundaries had given them security they'd been missing. But the most important change wasn't in them. It was in me. I'd discovered something essential during those dark days of pain and abandonment. My own worth didn't depend on how useful I was to other people. I had value simply by existing, by being myself, regardless of whether I could provide childcare or cooking or convenient solutions to other people's problems. I started attending a support group for people recovering from surgery, where I met others who'd faced similar challenges with family members who didn't understand the realities of physical limitations. Hearing their stories, some much worse than mine, helped me understand that what had happened wasn't unique. Families exploited their elder members with disturbing regularity, often without recognizing the harm they were causing. I also reconnected with former colleagues from my nursing days, women I'd lost touch with during the years of intensive motherhood and widowhood. They invited me to lunch, to movies, to book clubs, and volunteer opportunities. I discovered I had an identity beyond Michael's mother and Emma and Lucas's grandmother. I was Margaret, a woman with interests and opinions and dreams that had nothing to do with serving others. 6 months after that terrible week, I stood in my kitchen making dinner. Real dinner, not cereal or frozen food. When Michael called, "Mom, I have something I want to tell you. Something I hope you'll hear as the compliment it's meant to be." "I'm listening." "Jennifer and I were talking about that week, about what we put you through and what you did afterward. Standing up for yourself, demanding accountability, refusing to just let it slide." He paused, and I could hear emotion in his voice. "I told her that I hope our kids grow up to be like you, strong enough to demand respect, brave enough to establish boundaries even when it's hard, confident enough in their own worth to walk away from people who don't treat them right." Tears sprang to my eyes, unexpected and cleansing. "That means more than you know. You taught me something I should have learned a long time ago," he continued. "That loving someone doesn't mean accepting whatever treatment they give you. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold people accountable for their behavior. You taught me what real strength looks like." After we hung up, I stood at my window watching the sunset paint my neighborhood in shades of gold and amber. My knee still ached. It probably always would. A permanent reminder of what I'd survived and what it had cost me. But I was walking without a walker now, driving again, reclaiming pieces of independence I'd feared were lost forever. The story could have ended differently. I could have swallowed the hurt and pretended everything was fine, maintained peace by accepting mistreatment and calling it love. Many women my age did exactly that, choosing familiar dysfunction over the uncertainty of confrontation. But I'd learned something essential during those 7 days of suffering. Sometimes the most dangerous place is the silence where injustice grows unchallenged. Sometimes love requires truth more than it requires harmony. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is demand to be treated with the dignity you've always given to others. I am 55 years old. I survived major surgery and abandonment, and the revelation that the people I'd sacrificed everything for saw me as disposable. I survived, and I emerged stronger, clearer, more certain of my own value than I'd ever been before. The pain taught me something precious, that I was stronger than I knew, more resilient than I'd imagined, more worthy of respect than I'd believed. And that knowledge, hard-won and dearly purchased, is a gift I carry with me every single day. I learned that sometimes, when you feel invisible, the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to disappear. To stand up, even when standing hurts, and say, "I matter. My pain matters. My dignity matters. And I will not accept less than I deserve, no matter who asks me to diminish myself for their convenience." That lesson was worth every tear, every moment of suffering, every dark night when I wondered if I'd survive. Because now I know the truth. I am not disposable. I am not a resource to be exploited. I am a woman who survived, who stood up, who demanded justice and dignity and basic human respect. And if you're out there, reading this, feeling invisible or taken for granted or worn down by people who claim to love you while treating you as if you don't matter, please hear this. You are not alone. Your pain is real. Your worth is absolute. And you have every right to demand better. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say is simply, "No more. I deserve better than this, and I will not participate in my own diminishment any longer." I learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, never too late to establish boundaries, never too late to demand the respect you should have been receiving all along. That's my story. That's my truth. And if it helps even one person find the courage to demand better treatment, then every moment of suffering was worth it. Because in the end, the greatest gift you can give yourself is the permission to take up space, to matter, to refuse to disappear just because someone finds your needs inconvenient. I matter. You matter. We all matter. And sometimes, the most revolutionary act is simply believing that truth and living accordingly.